Welcome to the Unfading Truth Bible reading plan. Today we're reading Romans chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. Ditch the day's distractions and dwell on one of the Bible's most profound claims. Romans chapter 4, beginning here at verse 16. Therefore the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our Father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that were not. This week we're working our way through article number 15 of the fourth point of the Canons of Dort, looking at different responses to God's grace. We've been reminded that those who receive God's grace, well, we owe and give eternal thanks to God alone. But for others who have not yet been called, we are to pray to the God who calls things that do not exist as though they did. Well, this final clause of Romans chapter 4, verse 17, it's one of the most stunning statements ever written. It attributes two abilities to God that cannot be attributed to anyone or anything else. As is often the case with profound verses like this, all of the major English translations render it slightly differently. Not because each thinks the other is wrong, but because even though Paul's original words are simple and straightforward, there are multiple different ways to properly express it. Let's start with the first half of the clause. As we read it in the NIV, and the ESV is very similar, it reads, the God who gives life to the dead. The LEB and the NET translations put it this way, the God who makes the dead alive. My favorite is the good old KJV. It puts it this way, God who quickeneth the dead. And if we're to literally translate it, it says, God who is the life maker of the dead. But it's the second half of the clause that's even more stunning. Again, Paul's original verbiage is both simple and elegant. It goes this way in Greek. God calls, that's in English of course, but God calls Meonta hosanta. Meonta hosanta. Now there's more than one good way to translate this. Again, we read it in the NIV. God calls into being things that were not. The ESV puts it this way. God calls into existence the things that do not exist. The LEB puts it this way, that God calls the things that are not as though they are. The Net Bible, God summons the things that do not yet exist as though they already do. The KJV, God calleth those things which be not as though they were. And again, literally, it would go this way. God calls non-being to be. Let's dig a little bit deeper. We're bombarded nearly each and every moment with carefully crafted distractions designed to channel our attention to whatever product or service the distractor intended. Clicking on one slightly amusing short-form video, well, that quickly leads to a half hour or more of scrolling through slightly more amusing videos. A sudden pop-up ad causes us to covet a product we didn't even know existed until that point. High-resolution digital billboards vie for our attention as we drive through town. So take some time today to pull yourself away from the continual distractions and instead take time to dwell on one or both of these amazing truths: that God makes the dead alive, and that he makes things be out of nothing. The canons embrace Paul's profound theology here to bring comfort to those whose loved ones seem to continually dismiss the promises of the gospel. It tells us that for others who have not yet been called, we are to pray to the God who calls things that do not exist as though they did. You and others may have tried everything to convince your loved one of God's truth, but nothing seems to work. The canons here remind you, in this sad and desperate situation, to put your faith and trust in the God who is the life maker of the dead and the one who made all things out of nothing. Only he can bring new life to the lost. As you pray today, use the AAA prayer pattern. That's where you begin your prayer by acknowledging who God is. Today, open your prayer to our Father, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that were not. Then as you pray, go on to align your life with God's will. Pray that God will give life to those you know who ignore or reject his gospel truth. Then you can ask God for what it is that you need. Remember, everything else that you hear today is going to fade away, but the word of the Lord is unfading truth.